Okay, Riz, I think you've identified a lot of potential applications, but I also want to have this conversation within your space, which I think is precision medicine and precision care. If we look at how do we balance the specific nature of precision care with the population-wide requirement of public health.
Yeah.
How do you strike that balance? And how do we really speak? People talk about, okay, it has to be on individual patient level when we talk about precision medicine. But the general public has to be able to benefit from something when we are talking about population-wide. I know you would have had this question several times, but how do you strike this balance?
So that's a very, very nice question that you're asking, actually, because when you talk about individual treatment, individual diagnosis, of course, when you are even talking about any patient, each patient exists within a population and the dynamic within that population. So let's look at it a little bit differently. If for example, I live in a certain environment. My expression of my genes is not only influenced by what I inherit, but also the exposure to that environment, be it smoke or pollution or other aspects like maybe inorganic chemicals that exist in food, etc. This all influences and exposure to pathogens and different types of bacteria and microbes, they all influence and impact the way my genes are expressed. And so, if I want to enable precision healthcare, or I have to look at it from a public healthcare level as well, I have to be able to identify that specific patient within the population they live in. So, technically speaking, as much as we talk about individualized medicine, precision diagnostics, what we are talking about is that we need to characterize an approach to care for specific patients within a population. And in order for you to do that, you need to understand the entire population dynamic to say that this specific gene influences this drug treatment within this specific population, and that patient, whether they have the mutation or not, will then receive a certain drug or not, because each patient population, if I look at drugs, for example, and the pharmacogenomic effect, you would understand that there's a certain receptor that a drug needs to bind to on a cell, and it needs to be able to elicit its target, right, and treatment for that matter. Now, in some patients that exist in different population groups, these cell receptors are different. And there's no use giving them a drug that they do not respond to. And so this is why this precision public health approach is also very important. So as much as we talk about individualized care, we need to also understand that to get to that level of individualized care, you have to understand that person within the population they live in. And that's why it's important to also have enough data on the population so that, because all we are doing when we are analyzing a human genome is we are seeing differences in this genome, all these huge differences, millions of differences or polymorphic regions that are different between humans. And in order for us to narrow down what differences are significant and what differences are insignificant, we have to understand that person within the population they come from, their ancestry, their background, and the genetic influences of the environment. And generally, that's the reason why you find these national genome programs are very focused on the country, on the mixture of people within that country, and in order for them to give understanding to precision or to enable precision public health care, they are always utilizing the patient population and the reference of that patient population to be able to make inferences on any individual person in that given group. I
Yes,
hope I've answered.
yes, you did. You did really, really well. So I'm curious to know now when you have uh, this desire, I know there is also interest around tuberculosis. I know there are also interest around non-communicable diseases, and we are doing this whole genome sequence. Is it being done on interest by interest basis, case by case basis, or the approach is let's expand let's have a massive database of human genomes in South Africa that we can now leverage on and use for different purposes, whether we are interested in HIV studies, whether we are interested in tuberculosis studies across population, or whether it's something around non-communicable diseases. So what does the current structure look like? Because I've been speaking to other researchers in other spaces that have something almost similar, but on entirely different projects. This may seem to be isolated. So what does the coordination look like? What does the flow chart looks like in terms of these projects? Sorry, your mic is off.
So I think that when you talk about individual projects versus other projects, obviously people are running different projects with different questions that they are asking. But at the baseline, if you are sequencing that cohort of patients that exist in that study, it makes sense for those patients to get some value from that. Now, for us to give value to those patients in research studies as well, we have to be able to at least harmonize these data sets in a single location or make it accessible for various studies to utilize the data across the board so that we can develop the knowledge on our African populations faster. Because remember, we are still catching up. We haven't got enough data on our African populations overall. So in order for us to plug this gap, we have to be willing to share. And I think that we can solve the human genome heterogeneity in the human genome, or the vast variation within the human genome, if we can work together to solve it. So these individual projects all have synergies in the sense that if I'm generating data on patient populations, am I generating the same type of data is the first question. And if you are generating like NGS level sequencing data, then that can also feed into helping other projects understand their data better. For example, you have people that are conducting global human genome programs, and they are working on different genomic sequencing projects, and they then log their data on, like, an example would be the European Genome Phenome Archive. And this archive collects data sets because if I am to publish my data set, I would have to log my data set in a traceable archive, and I'd have to make sure it's kept secure and it is governed by a data access committee. Now, often enough, that data sits there and it is published, so it has a traceable record identity. And then, for example, my study might have answered one question, but my study has enough data on this population group to help answer other scientific questions. And then you would find that other scientists and groups would then contact the data access committee and ask for permission to utilize the data, and then disclose exactly what level of utilization is required for this data set, and then access is then given to them to do so or not, depending on the data access committee rules and governance strategy of that data set. Now, in a population dynamic where you are working within the government structure and you are running a national program, this is the same kind of logic being used, where I will conglomerate all of the data sets created on our patient population in a certain place. It should be the job of governments to host this type of data, to make it accessible for the research base, but also to govern it accurately, to manage that data, to ensure that there's complete value, mutual benefit being derived from that data. And that is something that, that's kind of what our ambition would be, to create a centralized local resource of our population data, so that it is also open to other studies that are being conducted on our patient population, and they're welcome to then log that data as well to make it accessible to the very same patients. And what's also very important is the traceability of the data set. So no longer do we want to just take large data sets and govern them under, small data access committees. There's a huge drive about empowering people and ensuring that if your data is sitting in an archive somewhere, you are aware that your data is there, and that you are contacted when your data is used, and you are also part of that sort of process. So there's a new shift in terms of this dynamic. And another one would be, I think another key aspect to mention also would be about creating trusted research environments, in a virtual space. So where data is kept, it's a trusted research environment where you can completely trace and track what is happening to that data set. And we're seeing this evolve as the new European health data policy has been launched, as we see what is happening with the All of Us program, for example, where anonymized data is made available for research, but you're not allowed to download this data. You're not allowed to utilize this data on your own system, but whatever you do to the data set is recorded and kept within the centralized archive. Now, in order for us to achieve that in Africa, we have to also be mindful of the infrastructure gaps, because there are big infrastructure gaps. Not every country has the data infrastructure to enable such complicated, sophisticated systems for data exchange and data control. And this now plays a huge dynamic when it comes to equity in collaborating on developing these data sets and working within this research environment. So that's one of the reasons why we have to create those trusted research environments, and everybody needs to play their role in doing so. And that also leads to responsible research anyway.
Absolutely. Do you think it's the government's role to actually create this, or who is creating this in South Africa? The reason why I'm putting it in South Africa specifically is, when it comes to this kind of research on the continent, South Africa is probably one of the places that has gone way ahead of several other African countries. So, and a lot of African countries that may be interested in doing something similar would be looking at what currently exists in South Africa. So, in terms of having this handshake, crossing over, getting the best and as much as we can out of the data that are being generated by different research groups working on these different tools, but that the information that they are getting could actually answer loads of other information questions elsewhere. So what currently exists?
So currently, we have to create that resource, right? And yes, I do think it is kind of the responsibility of governments, because they are custodians of taxpayers' money, and that they have to do things to enable an enabling ecosystem for all, be it research, be it even creating the resources that are necessary for us to be able to drive also economic value. So it's not only just the place of government. I think it's the place of all ecosystem players as well. So I'm not going to only leave it in the responsibility of governments, because sometimes governments don't have enough resources, and that has to be a practical viewpoint that needs to also be considered. And where governments don't have the actual resources, there are other economic players that are already playing or enabling economic value within that particular country and ecosystem. And so it becomes responsibility of all ecosystem enablers to make sure that when they are activating such initiatives and doing so within, whether it's a multinational company coming in to do this, they should be mindful of the balance. And I think that's why it's important to have good data management policy and regulation. And this is where it always will fall short. There will be places where these kind of policies are not activated, and then that will leave for exploitation. But in any way, I think the main thing is that government should be creating that supportive environment and maintaining that balance, and making sure that whatever does happen, it does have good value for its people, because this is also an expensive trade. You can't just expect taxpayers to always be facilitating such infrastructure, because then there won't be any sustainability. So we have to think of what are those economic models that could work for low middle income countries, as opposed to what's already working in higher, more advanced income countries.
Thanks, Rizwana. Then, so let's circle back to the elite, to the HIV elite controllers. And so, what do you think? How much difference do you think this initiative can make? And what are you doing to be able to, because to project this as the potential outcomes, the potential benefits of probably what issues that you've been passionately telling me about?
So I think the one thing is, we never had an understanding, quite a big understanding in terms of innate immune control within our population. And so this very small study, like I said initially, it does create a baseline of research that needs to be expanded. And the fact that we looked at family models, it helps us minimize in terms of being able to make a good inference on what are those differences that need to be expanded on. Because we haven't been able to look at the complete multi-omics approach in terms of the expression dynamic, etc., within the population, this would be like the second step. So we identify potential genes and markers that are potentially implicated in this innate immune control, and now we need to expand and sort of validate that. And I feel that the expansion phase needs to be at a higher level, where we can expand the sample number. And this has always been an issue when we do all of these studies. We don't have enough samples, and the power of the study is always affected. So that would be something that we would want to see next.
Then what about the 110K genome project?
Yes. So I think that the 110K genome program, of course, it will have to take into account the fact that we have this active HIV population, and we have to develop more knowledge around disease progression within our population. So we can't just focus on like non-communicable diseases, for example. We have to have a mix, and we have to be relevant to our patient population.
Thank you so much. What about resources? I was looking at budgetary allocation for health in South Africa over the last couple of years, and I benchmarked a particular major donor's support for South Africa, and it represented a significant proportion of what the government is planning to spend on health. Now we have loads of issues that are fighting for the government's attention.
To tell you the truth, I have an opinion on this. So I will give you an opinion and what I think, and maybe there's a better rationale out there, which I'm very open to. But from my point of view, I would say that yes, there is a lot of systemic issues within the healthcare delivery that needs to also be addressed within our health system and from a public perspective, from a government perspective in terms of healthcare delivery. However, when we talk about addressing our burden of disease, we have what we call a quadruple burden of disease. And this is almost 2 to 3 times higher than normal populations that are normal countries that face a non-communicable burden of disease, for example. But on top of that, we also have, and oh, by the way, our non-communicable disease burden is not properly classified. We haven't done all of the epidemiology around it because we just call it non-communicable diseases. But in each of those areas of non-communicable disease, we have to properly classify it. And there's a lot of work from an epidemiological perspective to look at. And then we have this added big infectious disease rate, and it's HIV and TB. And by the way, people on ARV treatments are also impacted by comorbidity issues. And so if we talk about how do we tackle the burden of disease sustainably, it would mean we would have to make these upfront costs, take up these large scale upfront costs in a program like this for us to be able to lower the costs down the line. So when we talk about precision medicine, we should understand that precision or personalized medicine is something that is changing the approach to healthcare overall. And the reason why it's actually changing the overall approach to healthcare is because of its sustainable and cost-effective approach for addressing burden of disease within any one country. And so you see the new models that are being expanded in the first world. Now imagine Africa and obviously being able to imbibe new technological advancements within healthcare. So each of these factors have a different economic set of economic activities that also come out. So if you look at the investment that was made on the first human genome program in the year 2000 from the US government, I think they calculated that today for every $1 that was spent on that very, very expensive program, the US economy benefited by $141 in return. So that is a very big return on investment. So if we want to calculate how and justify what we do, one part is, yes, we have to address the systemic issues now to improve healthcare delivery. But that's not the only thing. We have to also plan for a sustainable future in addressing our burden of disease and our healthcare issues. And in order for us to also lower the cost down the line and improve the quality of life of the people in our country to improve our economic activity, we would have to make these big investments upfront. And the trick is, how do you convince politicians at the highest level to see that? Because they do see precision medicine as fancy science. They see it as something, oh, this is not applicable. We've got such huge systemic issues locally. However, we've also shown that small investments on low-hanging initiatives can also change dynamics, and including technology like mobile technology is becoming a huge. There's a huge wave in terms of using wearables and your mobile phone, and people are taking more of an interest in taking care of their own health and their own healthcare needs. And I think that together, all of those solutions provide an answer. So that's my take on this situation, and everybody has a different one.
Thank you so much, Rizwani. I really appreciate you taking this time to talk to me. Thank you so much.